Have you ever been like scrolling on your phone out of just pure boredom, clicked on something slightly weird, and suddenly felt like the algorithm knew exactly what you were doing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that feeling where the screen almost seems to be, reading your mind.
Right. Or worse, like it's setting this quiet little trap for you, just waiting to see if you'll actually take the bait.
Yeah.
It's a very specific, I mean, a very modern kind of unease.
It really is. We're just so accustomed to being the ones consuming the content, right?
Yeah.
We kind of forget that the digital infrastructure we interact with every day, well, it might be designed to consume us.
That is a terrifying thought.
I mean, behind the smooth glass of our screens, there's this very deliberate, very patient architecture of coercion. We like things to be visible. We like them categorized.
Yeah, we assume our devices are just tools, like tools that we control.
Exactly. But when those boundaries blur between a passive tool and an active predatory system, that comfort just vanishes completely.
Okay, let's unpack this because we have a really fascinating narrative today for our deep dive that takes that exact algorithmic dread and just pushes it to its absolute limit.
That really does.
We're diving into a story called The Loop in the Rearview Mirror, and our mission today is to dissect this haunting account of a university student who finds a seemingly harmless car listing online for a single solitary rupee and unwittingly enters a supernatural temporal loop.
A literal loop.
Yeah, we're going to explore the mechanics of this trap, the psychological horror of facing yourself, and a twist that fundamentally redefines the entire concept of survival.
It serves as a masterclass in modern tech-driven horror, precisely because it grounds the supernatural in the mundane.
Right, the everyday stuff.
Exactly. Walking home under a dull gray sky, idly scrolling on a smartphone. I mean, these are universal modern experiences. But the narrative uses these mundane actions to ask some really profound questions about human agency.
And the nature of memory, too.
Yes. And the inherent vulnerabilities of our curiosity. We're basically forced to look at the systems we blindly trust and ask, what happens when those systems are actually ancient cycles of destruction wearing a digital mask?
The entry point to this whole nightmare is just so incredibly relatable. We have a university student walking home on a slow, cloudy afternoon.
We've all been there.
Right. It's that specific kind of day with a dull gray light that makes everything look lethargic and, I don't know, washed out.
Yeah, that understimulated state.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In that state, the brain just craves dopamine.
Hmm.
And what do we do when we're bored and understimulated?
We pull out our phones.
We pull out our phones and we scroll.
And that state of passive reception is just the perfect soil for a trap. Psychologically, when we're doom scrolling or aimlessly swiping, our cognitive defenses are totally lowered.
We're not on guard at all.
Not even a little. The student isn't actively hunting for a vehicle, right? They're just seeking a momentary distraction to fill the quiet void of the walk home. They're basically operating on autopilot.
And on that autopilot, they stumble across a listing. There's no title. There's no description. It's just a single image of an old black car parked in an empty field.
But there's something deeply wrong with the photo.
Yeah, it isn't blurry or low quality or anything.
Right, the lighting just doesn't match the surroundings. The car looks too dark, too still.
It's like an uncanny valley effect, but applied to a landscape.
That's a great way to put it. The concept of the uncanny valley is usually applied to humanoid faces, things that look almost human but are just off enough to trigger revulsion.
Like those weird early CGI movies.
Exactly. It's an evolutionary defense mechanism to keep us away from corpses or disease. But here we see those same evolutionary alarm bells ringing for an environment.
Because of the lighting.
Right. The lighting mismatch suggests that the car isn't actually a part of the physical space it's being photographed in. It's an insertion, like a glitch in reality.
But it's perfectly framed within the familiar, trusted borders of a digital marketplace app.
Yes. The supernatural force is literally utilizing modern UX design to launder its anomalous nature.
I want to focus on the specifics of this bait, though. It's a 90s model car, slightly damaged but intact, and crucially, it has no number plate.
Which is the first concrete red flag.
Oh, totally. But the thing that really hooks the student is the price. It's listed for exactly 1 rupee.
Just what?
Yeah. The student literally mutters out loud that it must be a joke. But I keep thinking about that specific price point. Why 1 rupee? Why not just list it for free?
It's a good question.
If you're a supernatural entity trying to lure someone, Wouldn't free get the most clicks?
Actually, no. Free would likely trigger skepticism.
Wait, really?
Yeah, think about it. If you see a car listed for free, your immediate thought is that it's a scam or, it has a ruined engine or it's a placeholder to negotiate a real price later.
Oh, that makes sense.
But a nominal fee, a single rupee, does something very specific in human psychology and contract law. It implies a binding transaction.
What, you mean like the concept of consideration in legal terms?
Precisely. In contract law, for an agreement to be binding, there has to be consideration, something of value exchanged between the parties.
But it doesn't have to be a lot of value.
Right, it doesn't have to be a fair market value.
Yeah.
Historically, courts have accepted a single peppercorn as valid consideration. By asking for 1 rupee, the supernatural entity is establishing a contract.
Wow.
It's not offering a gift, it's presenting an agreement. The moment the student engages with that price, they are subconsciously accepting terms they haven't even read. They're validating a transaction.
That is insidious. It's like a cursed contract disguised as a bargain hunt.
Yeah.
So the student sees this, and there's no seller name, no location, no contact number, just one single button that says, I'm interested.
And they know they should ignore it.
They absolutely do. But that morbid curiosity takes over, and they tap the button. Instantly, the screen freezes. A message appears. Pick up tonight.
And there's no option to reply, no chat window.
Nothing. The student stares at it, whispers, this is weird, and tries to close the app. But before they can, the phone vibrates. A location is received. It's a place far outside the city, totally isolated, with this ominous instruction, come alone.
We're basically witnessing the mechanics of coercive design, or what UX designers call dark patterns.
But elevated to a supernatural extreme.
Exactly. The student initiates the interaction by tapping a pica. I'm interested, but from that millisecond forward, the app takes total control. The screen freezing denies the user the ability to navigate away. It's a forced continuity.
Well, hold on. Let me push back on the reality of this reaction for a second.
Sure.
If my phone froze and gave me a creepy instruction to go to an isolated field alone, I wouldn't go. I would force restart my phone, go home, and lock my doors.
I think most people would like to believe that.
It reminds me of those highly targeted phishing scams. Your brain is flashing big red warning lights telling you this is a bad idea, do not click the link. Why does the student actually follow through and go to the location?
Well, it's easy to assume we'd act rationally, but the compulsion to investigate the unknown often overrides our instinct for self-preservation.
Even when it's obviously dangerous.
Especially when the threat is mediated through a screen. We feel this false sense of invulnerability because the interface is familiar. The student thinks they're safe because they're just standing on a normal city street holding a piece of glass and metal.
Like nothing can actually hurt them through the phone.
Right. The entity doesn't physically drag the student to the field. It creates a psychological itch. The instruction, come alone, is a challenge to their autonomy. The student goes because they convince themselves they're in control.
Oh, I see. They tell themselves they're just going to check it out and can leave at any time.
Exactly. They convince themselves they are an observer, not a participant.
That is such a human flaw. So they transition from the digital trap to the physical one. They take their bike out that night, and the environmental shift is stark. The city lights flicker and eventually disappear completely. They ride into total darkness.
And this physical journey represents the crossing of a threshold.
Like leaving the normal world behind.
Yes. In mythological terms, they're leaving the world of the living, the structured city with its lights and social rules, and entering a liminal space.
A space between space.
Exactly. A liminal space is a place of transition, lacking clear boundaries or human context. It operates under entirely different rules.
And right in the middle of this dark, empty field is the car, parked exactly like it was in the photo. The student stops their bike, and the engine dies. The air feels colder, heavier. It's as if they've crossed an invisible boundary line.
And the car itself is deeply unsettling.
Yeah, the paint is faded, the windows are tinted, but there are no scratches, no dirt. It's perfectly clean.
And that pristine condition is a massive red flag. A car left in an open field should be dusty, right? Covered in pollen, maybe rusted. It should show the effects of entropy.
But it doesn't.
No. A physical object that defies entropy is a violation of natural laws. It visually reinforces that this vehicle does not belong to the physical reality of the field. It's an altar waiting for a sacrifice.
That's a chilling image. The student walks around it, and then they notice the physical bait. The driver's door is slightly open, just a crack. Their heart rate spikes.
Of course it does.
They call out into the dark field, but There's no response. They step closer, push the door, and it creaks open. The inside isn't dusty either. It looks used, like someone had just been sitting there. And waiting right there in the ignition is the key.
The psychology of the slightly open door is so fascinating here.
How so?
Well, in design theory, there's a concept called affordances. It's the implicit clues an object gives about how it should be used.
Like a handle affords pulling.
Exactly. A locked door affords exclusion. It tells you to go away. A fully open door might seem too obvious, like too aggressive a trap. But a door that is slightly ajar affords discovery.
It's an invitation.
An invitation that feels accidental. It makes the victim feel like they are exploiting an opportunity rather than walking into a snare.
Oh, man. So they're standing there, looking at the key. They whisper, "Is this a prank?" And right at that moment, their phone buzzes. In this dead, silent field. A new message from an unknown number. Start it.
Just those two words.
They freeze. They look around the empty darkness. Nothing. Just them and the car. They say, "This is stupid," but their hand is already moving. They sit in the driver's seat and pull the door shut. And the moment that door clicks shut, the entire atmosphere changes.
The outside world instantly feels distant.
Muted. It really makes me think of a sensory deprivation tank.
Oh, that's a really good comparison.
Yeah, like when you close the heavy door of a float tank, the entire world just vanishes. The ambient noise, the air currents, the light, it's all gone. You are suddenly completely isolated, alone with your own heartbeat. That is what this car is. It's no longer a vehicle designed for transport. It's an isolation chamber.
That is a perfect analogy. By muting the outside world, the car acts as a psychological Faraday cage.
A Faraday cage for the mind.
Right. It blocks out all external reality and forces the student's attention entirely inward onto the dashboard and the interior of the vehicle. The environment is actively manipulating their sensory focus.
And with their focus entirely inside the car, they turn the key. The engine starts instantly. It's too smooth, with no delay. And as the engine hums, a small, old screen built into the dashboard flickers on. Text appears, typing out slowly, letter by letter. Welcome back.
The student's heart must have absolutely stopped.
Completely. They have never been to this field. They have never seen this car, but the car thinks it knows them.
Welcome back is such a terrifying phrase because it implies a pre-existing relationship that the student has no memory of. It violates their personal timeline.
Like they've been here before.
It suggests that this isn't a random encounter, but a return to a cycle they're already a part of. And immediately following that psychological blow, the physical trap engages. The doors lock. A hard mechanical click.
The student grabs the handle. It doesn't budge. Panic sets in. Their breathing gets uneven, and the screen changes again to a single word. Drive.
This is the pivot point.
This is the moment the student realizes they aren't alone in this sensory deprivation tank. Because exactly at the moment the screen says drive, they notice something move in the rearview mirror.
The transition from the physical geography of the trap to the psychological horror of the occupant is just seamless.
It really is. The car has secured the victim.
And now the entity reveals itself.
The student freezes. Slowly, very slowly, they look up into the mirror. In the back seat, someone is sitting there. Perfectly still. It's just a shape, a dark, silent figure. The student whispers that it isn't real. The screen flickers again. Drive.
The student grips the wheel and refuses, but that feeling of being watched from behind is overwhelming.
It taps into a deeply primal human fear.
Oh, evolutionarily, we are wired to be terrified of what we cannot see behind us. Apex predators often attack from the blind spot.
Right, where we can't protect ourselves.
Right, exactly. The rearview mirror acts as a terrifying framed painting of that exact evolutionary vulnerability. The entity isn't attacking them physically. It's exerting a paralyzing psychological pressure simply by existing in the space where they cannot directly defend themselves.
The silence of that standoff is broken by the car radio. It turns on with a loud burst of static. The student flinches. Slowly, the static shifts into a low, distorted voice. And it says, "You're late."
Notice the continued use of language implying obligation. First, welcome back, and now, you're late.
Like they missed an appointment.
The supernatural force is gaslighting the student. It's insisting on a narrative of failed responsibility. It forces the victim onto the defensive.
The student turns the radio off instantly, trying to reassert control over the environment. They pull the door handle again, but it's locked solid. They say, "This isn't funny anymore." And the dashboard screen responds, "You already started."
Their hands go cold.
And then the car moves on its own. The steering wheel turns slightly, and the car begins rolling forward out of the field toward the road. The student slams their foot on the brake, but the pedal is completely stiff, unresponsive.
Total loss of control.
The headlights turn on automatically, cutting into the darkness of an endless empty road. The car is driving itself.
The total loss of physical agency is now complete. The student is trapped in a moving metal cage. But the horror escalates because the true threat isn't the autonomous car.
No, it's the passenger.
Exactly. As the car drives, the rearview mirror shifts. The figure in the back seat moves. Its head tilts, slow and unnatural, and it leans forward, closer to the glass.
The student can almost see its face, but the features are shifting, changing, trying to become something. The student's hands are shaking violently as they ask who the figure is. Only silence. Then the radio turns on again. The static is gone. A sharp, clear, loud voice commands. Look at it.
This is a really critical juncture in understanding the mechanics of this supernatural system.
How do you mean?
Well, the car is driving itself. The doors are locked. The entity clearly has absolute power over the physical reality of the vehicle. Yet, it issues a verbal command for the driver to look in the mirror.
It asks them to do it.
Right. It does not physically force their head to turn. It demands their psychological compliance.
I have to ask about this mechanic because it seems like a contradiction. If this entity has the power to hijack a vehicle and control the electronics, why does it need the driver to look?
That's the million-dollar question.
Why does its power seem contingent on the driver's attention? I mean, if it wants to kill them, it could just drive the car into a tree while they're looking forward. Why the command?
That is a crucial observation. It tells us that the entity is not merely an executioner. It requires a witness to complete its cycle.
A witness.
Yeah. In many psychological frameworks, particularly Carl Jung's concept of the shadow self, a repressed trauma or a dark aspect of the psyche only gains true destructive power when you are forced to acknowledge it.
So if you ignore it, it can't hurt you.
In a way, yes. If the student refuses to look, the entity remains unformed. Remember how its features were shifting?
Yeah, like it was trying to become something.
Exactly. It needs the student's gaze to crystallize its identity. In a strange way, it's an application of the quantum observer effect to horror. The act of observation collapses the entity into a defined reality.
Wow.
Observation is the catalyst for the curse.
So observation is the final input required. The voice gets louder. Look at IT. The student tenses up, and before they can stop themselves, they look directly into the mirror. And they see its face. Their heart stops.
Because it's not a stranger.
It's them. The exact same face.
Same eyes, but empty. Dead.
We're dealing with the horror of the doppelganger. In literature and psychology, the doppelganger represents the denied or the destined fate of the individual.
Seeing yourself like that.
Seeing oneself as an autonomous, malevolent entity shatters the boundary between the self and the external threat. You cannot fight the monster because the monster is you. The dead version of them in the back seat slowly smiles this wide, unnatural smile. And it speaks, using the student's own voice. It says, "You left me here."
You left me here completely shifts the paradigm.
It sounds so betrayed.
It implies abandonment. It accuses the current living student of a past betrayal. It basically weaponizes the concept of guilt against a victim who has absolutely no memory of committing a crime.
The student whispers in shock, and instantly the car accelerates. The road blurs. The steering wheel spins slightly, correcting itself, locked onto a destination. The student screams that they didn't do anything. The reflection leans even closer, face almost touching the glass, and says, "You forgot."
Then the dashboard screen flickers violently and new text appears in all caps. Route restored.
Which is terrifying.
Route restored confirms the programmatic nature of this haunting. The car is an algorithmic machine designed to execute an endless cycle of accidents.
It was always going to happen.
The destination was always fixed. The phrase implies that the route was temporarily paused, waiting for the necessary data, which was the driver's acknowledgement of the passenger, and now the system resumes its predetermined path.
We immediately see what that destination is. The headlights reveal another car ahead, stopped in the middle of the road, damaged, crushed. The student's chest tightens because they recognize it.
It's the same car.
It's the exact same car, broken and destroyed like it had been in a massive accident. The version of him in the back seat smiles wider and says, "We're almost there."
This is the visual manifestation of absolute determinism.
You're driving right into it.
The student is literally driving toward their own wreckage. It's a closed temporal loop made visible on the asphalt. The crash has already happened, and yet they are speeding toward it. Time has collapsed on itself.
The car speeds up, rocketing straight toward the crashed vehicle. The student screams to stop the car, but it doesn't slow down. And just before the violent impact, the screen goes black. Darkness. Complete silence.
This blackout serves as the transition between the iterations of the loop. It's the system's digital reset.
For a moment, the student thinks it's over. No sound, no pain. But then a faint sound. Beep, beep. Their eyes slowly open. The world flickers back. They are still in the car, but everything has changed. The windshield is cracked. The dashboard is broken. Headlights are flickering weakly. And the air smells strongly of smoke.
The narrative grounds the psychological horror in brutal tactile reality right here.
Yeah, the sensory details are awful.
We move from the abstract terror of a doppelganger to the visceral aftermath of a collision, the smell of smoke, the fractured glass, the dying battery. It forces the supernatural to obey the physics of a car crash.
They look down, their hands are on the steering wheel, shaking violently, and they're covered in something dark. We all know what it is. And then the memory hits them. Not slowly, but all at once, like a dam breaking. The road, the speed, the turn that was too sharp, losing control, the impact, glass shattering, metal twisting, and then silence.
Though a turn of memory is a violent intrusion.
It must be so overwhelming.
What we are examining is a twisted version of dissociative amnesia. In real-world psychology, the brain often suppresses traumatic memories to protect the conscious mind, allowing the person to survive the immediate aftermath of horror.
Rearview.
Here, the amnesia is not a defense mechanism, it is the mechanism of the trap itself. The true horror isn't dying in a car crash, it's surviving, forgetting the trauma, and being forced to walk willingly back into the trap to perpetuate your own torture.
They realized the crash wasn't just something they saw, it was something they just lived. They look at the passenger seat. Empty. They look in the rearview mirror. Nothing there, just themselves. For a second, there's a wave of relief. Maybe it's over. But then the radio turns on, soft static, and then their own voice plays through the speakers, clear and calm.
Which is so unsettling.
It says, if you're hearing this, it means you forgot again.
This is profoundly chilling. The student has become their own black box.
Like on an airplane.
Right. In aviation, the black box records the final moments before a disaster so investigators can understand what went wrong. Here, a previous iteration of the student has left an audio recording to brief the current iteration on the nature of their damnation.
Hearing yourself tell yourself that you are trapped. The recording continues. Listen carefully. You don't have much time. The car doesn't crash once. It loops. Every time you try to leave, it brings you back.
And it reveals the mechanics.
It does. The recording reveals the actual mechanics of the crash.
Yeah.
It says, you weren't alone that night. You saw something in the back seat. You looked away from the road.
The recording explicitly outlines the causality of the loop. The crash was not a mechanical failure.
It was a trap.
It was the direct result of the driver's attention being hijacked by the entity. Looking away from the road toward the supernatural threat is the trigger for physical destruction.
The recording says, it wasn't an accident. It needed you to see it. And then the radio cuts out to dead silence. Slowly, the broken dashboard screen flickers back on. New text appears. Just 2 words that turn this entire nightmare into some sick game. Replay available.
Replay available. This UI element basically gamifies the trauma.
It really does feel like a game screen.
I want to connect this to the psychological concept of operant conditioning, specifically B.F. Skinner's experiments.
With the rats.
Yes. Skinner put rats in boxes where pressing a lever would sometimes give them food and sometimes give them a shock. The intermittent reinforcement removed their agency and turned them into compulsion machines.
So the button is the lever.
By presenting a replay available button, the system is framing a fatal, agonizing car crash as a video game level that can simply be reloaded. It highlights the student's complete lack of control. They are a user trapped within a hostile systems interface.
It's like a horrifying checkpoint. But usually, in a game, a checkpoint is a blessing. You use your knowledge to beat the boss. Here, the student isn't trying to win. They stare at the button, whispering, no? But their hand moves on its own and presses the screen.
The physical compulsion to press the screen demonstrates that the student is still bound by the system's rules.
They couldn't stop themselves.
They cannot simply sit in the wrecked car forever. The architecture of the trap demands forward motion, even if that motion is circular.
The moment they press it, the car resets. The cracks in the windshield disappear. The smoke fades away. The road is clear again. Night. Empty road. The engine is smooth. It is the beginning of the run all over again.
Back to the start.
The student looks in the rearview mirror. And there it is, the figure, sitting in the back seat, waiting. But this time, the reflection in the mirror is terrified, while the thing in the back smiles. And it speaks. It says, let's try again.
We're entering the climax now.
Yeah, things speed up here.
This second run is fundamentally different because the student is armed with memory. They are no longer the oblivious victims scrolling on their phone. They're acutely aware of the stakes and the mechanics of the trap.
And the entity knows that.
The entity knows this too, which is why its demeanor shifts from silent stalking to active vocal participation.
The car accelerates. Faster and faster. The student is gripping the steering wheel tight, whispering, stop! But they know it won't. They don't want to look in the mirror, but they do. And for the first time, the figure's face becomes crystal clear.
What do they see?
It's not just a generic dead version of them anymore. It looks like them, but older, tired, broken. Hollow eyes, pale skin, like something that had been stuck for a very, very long time.
This is a profound visual revelation. The entity is a future eroded version of themselves.
Or a past version.
Or rather, a version of themselves that has endured the loop countless times. Just as telomeres on our DNA degrade slightly every time a cell divides, causing biological aging, this entity shows the spiritual and psychological erosion of endless temporal repetition.
Just worn down to nothing.
Exactly.
This older, broken reflection speaks in a deeper, heavier version of the student's voice. It says, you really don't remember, do you? You weren't the only one driving that night. The reflection smiles faintly and says, look again. Suddenly, the memory from the crash hits the student again, but clearer. They see themselves in the driver's seat, and they see the other thing in the back.
The other them.
The reflection says, and you turned around. And that's when it shows. Which one of us would stay?
What's fascinating here is the explanation of the curse's binary nature.
It's like a terrible game of musical chairs.
In game theory, this is a perfect zero-sum game. There are only two positions, the driver's seat and the back seat. The entity in the back is desperate to swap places.
To get out of the back.
When the crash occurs, the violent disruption of reality basically shuffles the deck. One consciousness gets to sit in the driver's seat and try again, while the other is relegated to the back seat, becoming the haunting passenger.
The reflection explains it plainly. Every time the crash happens, one of us ends up in the driver's seat, and the other ends up back here. It is an agonizing cycle. And the car is approaching the curve now. The fatal curve. Fast. The dashboard flickers and starts a countdown. Impact in 5.
The countdown introduces an unbearable ticking clock tension.
The pressure is insane.
The climax is an internal battle of willpower. Willpower is often thought of as a finite resource, a concept known in psychology as ego depletion.
They're completely drained.
The student has been battered emotionally, physically, and mentally. Now, to survive the supernatural, they must do the most unnatural, difficult thing imaginable. Ignore the visceral threat whispering directly into their ear.
Which goes against all our instincts.
They must conquer the exact same morbid curiosity that brought them to the empty field in the first place.
The dashboard says 4. The reflection says, don't look at me. 3, don't turn around. 2, just drive. The students' hands are shaking violently. The curve is right in front of them. Everything is repeating. And at 1, they hear a whisper right behind them. Close. Too close. The entity says, look at me.
The entity is utilizing psychological judo.
How do you mean?
By explicitly telling the driver not to look during the countdown, it builds an unbearable psychological pressure, making the sudden, forceful command to look at me at the very last second almost impossible to resist.
Because it built it up so much.
It relies on induced panic to break their discipline.
The student feels that pull, that same curiosity. Their head slowly begins to turn, but they stop. They force their eyes locked forward. I'm not looking, they say. The whisper grows into a shout. Look at me.
The tension must be snapping.
My physical toll is immense. The student is clenching their teeth, tears forming in their eyes. They scream, I'm not looking. The car hits the curve, the tires screech, the steering wheel shakes violently, everything feels like it's falling apart. And then, silence.
They made it.
The car straightens out, no crash, no impact, just the road continuing forward.
They have achieved the impossible.
Really?
By refusing to engage with the distraction, by keeping their eyes rigidly on the road ahead, they break the causal chain that leads to the accident. They've solved the puzzle of the loop.
The student stops breathing. They whisper, I did it. Slowly, they look in their rearview mirror. The back seat is totally empty. No figure, no broken version of themselves. Nothing.
Just relief.
They let out a shaky breath. It's over. And the dashboard flickers one last time with a new text message. Driver confirmed.
The phrase driver confirmed provides a massive wave of relief. It mimics a victory screen.
You beat the level.
The student has passed the test, proved their willpower, and seemingly earned their freedom. But in a narrative governed by a coercive digital framework, system notifications are rarely what they seem.
A cold chill runs down the student's spine. The radio turns on, soft and calm. It's their own voice again, playing from the recording. If you're hearing this, it means you made it. Relief floods the student's chest. You broke the loop. They almost smile. But then the voice continues, which means you're ready.
Which means you're ready. This is the pivot that initiates the story's devastating final twist.
It's so mean.
Breaking the loop was not an exit condition, it was a qualification test.
The student's heart stops. Ready for what? The car slows down on its own. It comes to a stop. And they realize they're in the exact same empty field where they first found the car.
Right back where they started.
The engine turns off. Silence. The doors unlock with a loud click. The student pushes the door open and steps out into the cold air. They turn back toward the car and they freeze.
We are now seeing the full systemic horror of the trap revealed.
Because inside the car, sitting on the back seat, is someone. But it's not the broken version of themselves. It is someone completely new.
A new victim.
A new person. Confused. Terrified. Looking around, exactly like the student did the first time they sat in the car, their eyes meet. And the student feels that same understanding, that same realization.
They finally get it.
They step back and whisper, "No." And the dashboard inside the car lights up again, slowly typing out, "Next driver ready."
This revelation fundamentally recontextualizes the entire narrative. The loop was never a punishment meant to be escaped.
What was it then?
It was an incubation chamber, a training program. The entity in the back seat that tortured the student wasn't a demon or an ancient ghost. It was simply the previous victim who had finally managed to look forward and pass the curse on.
My mind is completely blown by this. The student hasn't escaped the system. They have simply been promoted within it. The person panicking inside the car grabs the door handle. And then the student hears it.
What do they hear?
From inside the car, playing over the radio to the new victim, the student's own voice. Calm, controlled, saying the word, "Drive."
And the student realizes they aren't speaking out loud. The system is using their recorded voice just as it used the previous victim's voice. The loop didn't end. It just moved forward a generation.
That's horrifying.
The student's role has shifted from the victim in the driver's seat to the menacing passenger waiting in the backseat. Survival in this ecosystem means becoming the monster.
That is a chilling new reality. They survived the test, but the prize for winning is becoming the haunting passenger. It makes you rethink everything about that first encounter.
It really does.
The entity that was stalking our student was just a prior victim, finally desperate enough to force someone else to take their place.
If we connect this to the bigger picture and bring it back to you, the listener, what does this say about human nature and the systems we inhabit?
Right, the real-world applications.
In psychology, there's a concept called identification with the aggressor. It's often seen in cycles of systemic abuse or extreme hazing.
Like fraternities or something.
Exactly. People subjected to a toxic, crushing environment often believe that surviving means they have overcome it. But sometimes, without even realizing it, our survival tactics mold us into the exact shape of the thing that was hurting us.
We become them.
We graduate from being the abused to being the abuser, simply stepping into a new role within that exact same toxic system. We think we have exited the vehicle, but we've merely climbed into the back seat to perpetuate the cycle for the next arrival.
That is a heavy, incredible way to look at it. Just to recap the absolute nightmare journey we have been on today. It started with a single, nominal 1 rupee digital bait tapped out of pure boredom by a university student.
Just a casual tap.
It pulled them into an isolated geography. It locked them in a sensory deprivation chamber on wheels. It forced them to face a horrifying reflection of their own self.
A literal mirror.
Right. They fought an agonizing battle of willpower against their own curiosity to keep their eyes on the road. And finally, the devastating realization that breaking the loop wasn't an escape at all. Survival meant becoming the very monster that haunted them.
It is a perfectly constructed mechanical trap, utilizing the language of modern apps and interfaces to deliver an ancient mythological curse.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final deeply unsettling thought to mull over.
Something to keep you awake.
Exactly. Something that wasn't explicitly mentioned in the text, but heavily implied by the mechanics of this world. If the student break their own cycle of destruction and replace the entity in the back seat to haunt the next driver, what happened to the original passenger?
That's the real question.
Right. The unseen force that was haunting our student, where did they go? Did they finally get to go free? Are they returning to the real world, walking among us on the sidewalk, completely unnoticed, carrying the memories of endless car crashes?
Or is the universe just an endless, invisible chain of displaced souls driving stolen lives?
This raises a truly horrifying implication.
The person walking past you on the street tomorrow might have spent a century trapped in a rearview mirror, simply waiting for their turn to walk away.
So next time you're walking home, scrolling through your phone on a cloudy afternoon, and you see a listing that feels just a little bit wrong, maybe do yourself a favor. Close the app. Keep your eyes on the road ahead, and whatever you do, don't look back.